The Powers Project.
Carl, how are you, sir? Seems like I just saw you.
Great, Kurt. I'm doing well. Doing well. Thank you
Good.
so much. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you again. This is going to be the second part of a three-part series that I'm doing with you. The first part, we talked about Ukraine and Russia. And, of course, you know, we went off track a little bit, but it brought it back together.
We did, yeah,
as we
absolutely.
always do. Today, we're going to talk about the Second Amendment, and we're going to talk about gun control. So,
Yeah.
obviously, with what just happened in Texas
In Buffalo.
and Buffalo, and it just seems like every other week or every week, you know, we have a mass shooting somewhere. And I think I heard this year alone we've already had 26 mass shootings at schools. 26.
Yeah, that's so when you look at the statistics, it's still not very clear. We have, I guess, a way to say it, just to be brief, is we have so many shootings that the FBI and various groups, some other Jones does a really good list, and a few other groups that have tried to crowdsource things, they don't have the same metrics, which from a study point of view is problematic, because then you're trying to say, wait, what exactly, who's counting, and then what metric by which they count it. But the point is that we have so many. It's not like you have one or two a year, and then some sociologists could be making this part of, you know, his or her focus, and over a longitudinal study say this is what it means.
Right.
So it's sad that we have so many.
It is. So let's talk about this, because, you know, whenever we have a shooting like this, you know, we have the Republicans who say one thing, the Democrats who say another thing, and yet neither side are really pushing to do anything. They're really, I just feel like the left could do so much more, and the right obviously could just do something. It's like they don't, because they don't want to talk about gun control. They want to blame it on everything else. And I would agree to a certain extent that it's not the fact that we're a country where the citizens own guns, because the truth is we've owned guns the entire time this country's existed.
Correct.
I remember going to school, and I cannot recall exactly if the kids at my high school, if they had guns in the back of their trucks with, you know, on the racks or not. I want to say they did, because during hunting season they would often go off, hunting and stuff. So, but it was, you know, everyone had a gun, and it was never an issue. Like, no one ever thought, hey, I have a problem, I think I'm going to go shoot people, you know? And so it's obviously something's changed in the past 50 years.
Yep.
And it's not the fact that we own guns or more guns. You know, the guns are obviously an issue, because they're what actually kill, you know, they're able to kill many people very quickly. But if that's the only thing we're looking for, is to say, well, let's get rid of guns, then that's not really practical, is it?
So I really wanted to make sure I started sharing from this point of view. If your listeners who are listening today do listen to the first episode we talked about, one of the things that I felt like tonally, where it may have sounded like I ended up with, was a kind of doom and gloom, the world is broken kind of place. And I thought about that the whole way home, riding home. I'm like, oh man, because I want to say, for me personally, and then to your listeners or to you, America has always been a place of hope. I mean, people still, last time I checked, I think it was like 2015, but more people immigrate to the United States singularly in a year than they do everywhere else in the world combined. And so why do they do that? In multiple reasons, but hope that anybody could come here and have a shot, free of mostly constraints that you find in other parts. And that's something, parts of the world. That's something that I believe very deeply in. As a Christian in particular, I have hope, and not because, Jesus wins, and so the world can go to hell, and I'm only on the winning side, but because of the idea that there's a God who loves us, and that there's a God who wants us to have our best life now. That God has a wonderful plan for our lives, not just the wonderful plan is heaven, so it kind of sucks now, but just deal with it. There's much more to that from a religious point of view, which is not the point of the conversation. But so personally for me, I want to have hope, and I want to say that there are hopeful reasons for us to look forward with hope. and maybe I'll mention some of those as we go along, but what you just said, I think, is one of the greatest places to start with. We've had guns for a long time. We've had people who've killed other people for a long time. So has every other spot on the continent. We would say loosely, from at least the late 70s, 80s, we've had a problem, which means it's a problem that started at a specific time, which we perhaps can find in our own day an ending to that problem. And so that's something to be hopeful for, that I look forward and I say, we can figure these things out. Now, we've got a lot of issues, particularly amongst, I think, our leadership class, that make that challenging. But just as individuals, I think we kind of pick ourselves up. We don't give in to despair. We don't think, oh, it sucks, things are terrible, and it's just going to be horrible. We instead look forward and say, all right, let's go to work on this. Let's see if we can figure out, maybe there's a solution found in what caused this problem to begin for us. And maybe there's some other solutions that exist now that didn't exist previously, that regardless of how this thing started, if yours and my hypothesis is correct, regardless, we can apply them now, and it won't necessarily be harmful to someone's position on the Second Amendment or anything like that. So I just wanted to kind of go right there first to say, let's be hopeful.
Okay.
Let's live with hope. I live with hope every day. I have 3 daughters. I don't know what their future lives are going to be like. They're young adults, whether they're going to get married, whether they're going to have kids, adopt, whatever. But I certainly wouldn't have had children if I don't have hope. And some of the things that I would say or have said to you or we've talked about are things I've thought for 30 years. Man, I was actually just for preparing for this today, I was actually going through some of my writings and finding things that I'd written in my blog that's kind of dormant now, but that I'd written in 2002, 2001, 1998. Obviously, the Columbine shooting was in the late 90s, 99, 98. And so this is not like a new issue. The concern or frustration or the feeling of like, wait a minute, where did this come from? What's the factors? And yet still I'm going to be somebody who's hopeful as we kind of go forward and think through that.
Well, I'd like to push back just a little bit because part of what I think the issue may be, and I think at least contributes to the issue, the problems that we're having today with these mass shootings, is that people aren't hopeful.
No, they're not.
You are hopeful. I am. I like to say I have faith because I think, and again, this is just nitpicking. It's like, to me, hope is a wimp word. It's like you're hoping something. I have faith things will happen. When I put my mind to it, I have faith that it's going to happen.
Right.
I don't hope for it. But with that being said, people today I think this is why we have this culture of people who are just whining and just wanting to cancel anything that goes against their beliefs or their thoughts, and they don't want to face reality. They don't want to even debate. They just want to shut everything down at like a crying little child who's not getting their way. Give me my pacifier or I'm going to scream until I get it, sort of thing. Yeah. And so because of that, because they're positioning their place in life is always someone else's fault. It's easy to blame everyone else. And when we're blaming people, we're looking at the problem. We're not looking for solutions. And therefore, nothing ever gets accomplished. And so we continue the same craziness, and it continues on and on and on. And this is, I think, a big reason why we haven't found a solution to this problem yet.
Well, so with solution, I think there's going to have to be 2 layers, or as we approach it, there's the political layer, which most of us have little ability to affect, and we can talk about who we would elect. But if you paid attention at all in any of the recent elections, sad to say, it definitely feels like it's a rigged game.
It is.
And to your point earlier about comments that are made by different people. Obviously, maybe your listeners heard this, but President Biden, one of his first statements that he made was against the gun lobby. And as you and I think said this last time, or maybe we were just talking privately, but yeah, let's go after the gun. Let's go after the gun lobby. Let's go after every lobby. Let's go after Citizens United. Let's change those rules. But he doesn't want to say that. Right. So he's not going to say that. And the reason he's not going to say that is because he's on the payroll of all these lobbies and the big ticket people. But then you wonder, is everybody? And then probably the answer is yeah, just unfortunately.
About, yeah.
Right? And some of your listeners may remember that I ran a very local level, right? And so it wasn't as big of an issue. But you still had times when you wondered if someone who had deep pockets, who had interest in the city of Winter Park where I lived, approached me, are they genuinely saying, hey, I like your point of view? Or are they thinking, if I give you a significant amount of money, I can have leverage with you later? And it never came to fruition because I didn't win the election, but you kind of had that wonderings and stuff like that. So, as long as the political class is compromised, which it is, in my opinion,
Absolutely.
then there's that layer of finding solution. But I think there's a local layer of finding solution, which both deals with the issues at hand that we say, well, why is this happening? Maybe it's this problem or that problem that could be approached if there was courage and I guess force perhaps by the citizenry, right? And at the deeper level, the more true level. So back to why did this happen in the late 1970s or whatever, whichever time we're going to look at, and getting to that aspect of a culture, I would say a culture of despair, as well as a culture of whining. I think those two things maybe are similar. That speaks to then my own assessment of the world and my reflection of that assessment. So that's a personal thing I can control. And I know for a lot of people, they'll maybe initially kind of, oh, that's ridiculous, meaning they aren't going to shoot anybody, so it doesn't matter how they feel, they're not going to touch their friends. But it's a web that we weave. And one of the things I try to tell my students at the end of every semester is that in this experiment of self-governance that we have going on, it's easy to feel disconnected because of what we just said about the elections. But you can make a difference in the world as long as you realize the world is that around you. Right. Where you work, who you hang out with, and yet may only be 8 or 9 people. But you can be the kind of change agent that is a positive, uplifted, seeing the best in others, loving yourself, loving others kind of person. And if you do it, and those 7 or 8 do it, and the 7 or 8 they know do it, and the 7 or 8 they know do it, then there can be, I believe, kind of a groundswell that changes that attitude of despair or negativity or whining that I think is prevalent, or certainly a very dominant feature in our society.
And I agree with you. So here's what I'd like to do, because I wasn't going to jump into it quite yet, but now that now that we're here, I want to.
Okay.
So you make very valid points, and you're right. There are going to be people out there like of course, there are people who are never going to get it because they don't choose to get it. They would continue. They're going to always be victims. They're always going to blame people. There's nothing you can do to change those people's minds because they don't want to be changed. So, but for those who do and who can grasp this concept that who you hang around is who you become. That's such a true statement.
Yep.
I want to go and say beyond that, because the left likes to poo-poo on this idea, and the right, because the right brings it up. But for us to say that the video games that we play today, the music that we listen to today doesn't have some effect is complete bullshit.
Yep.
Complete bullshit. And
I agree.
I'm going to tell you why. One, the music that talks, you go back to the 70s. Paul McCartney and Wings wrote a song called Silly Love Songs.
Yep.
You'd think the world would have had enough of silly love songs, but I was wrong.
Yeah.
They want more.
Yeah.
You don't hear any love songs, not like everything in the 70s was about love. And it's not that the 70s didn't have their issues. We did. But I remember the mindset of people, average, everyday people who did back then have hope. They don't have it today because they're just being inundated with negativity 24 hours a day, not just by the people they hang around, to what they listen to what they see on TV, to the video games they play. Yep. You can't compare Bugs Bunny, who dropped an anvil on a boxer's head, and go, oh, see, that was violent, and watch something like, or play a game like, what's that?
Grand Theft Auto is the
Grand
best
Theft
example.
Yeah, Grand Theft Auto, where you run over cops or kill them and think that that's somehow the same. It is. It's not even close. It's ridiculous to say so. And we know, scientifically we know, that when we talk negatively to ourselves, we start believing what
Oh,
we
yeah.
tell ourselves. If I
Yeah.
go, Jesus, Kurt, you're so stupid sometimes,
Yep.
I'm going to start, if I say it enough times, I'm going to start believing I'm stupid.
Yep.
You know, I watch this as I've gotten older. I don't go, life sucks. I'm getting older. It just sucks. It's getting older. It's like it's a pain. I don't do that. That's why I'll never sign up for AARP. I will never ask
Me
for
neither. Yeah.
I will never ask for the senior citizens discount.
Yeah.
You know, and I'll probably be offended the day someone offers it to me.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
But it's because I don't want to have that mindset of being old, because I don't believe you have to be old. I
Sure.
believe you're as young as you choose to be. You're as smart as you choose to be. You're as nice as you choose to be. You're as disagreeable as you choose to be. But these are choices that we make. And because of what we've been inundated with, you know, I don't play Grand Theft Auto. I don't listen to music that talks about death and killing all the time. I don't surround myself with people who complain about the world and complain about our situations. We're aware of the situations, and we look for solutions for those things. But we also realize there's just certain things, you know, because of political reasons or whatever, there are just certain things that we're never going to be able to have control over or to do. And I'm not going to put my life on hold unless I feel that that particular topic is so important to me that I'm willing to fight for that 100%. You know,
Yeah.
so
Well, so let's back up, I think, a couple of steps for your audience's sake. You know, so we both said generally, hypothetically, or a hypothesis that prior to the let's just say mid 70s, that with the presence of guns in abundance in the country, and I remind your audience, if they go, yeah, but there weren't these semi-assault rifles. In the 20s, we had real machine guns
Right.
on the streets. They weren't prevalent and they weren't easy to get, but people had them. Right? So you don't see that, right? So I'm not saying that that's somehow a trump card, but just keep in mind, it's not like we didn't have rapid fire weapons, right? Or guns that could hold multiple rounds, right? So our hypothesis is, and the data backs this up. So again, I mentioned Mother Jones. It's a great place to go. You can go to Wikipedia, other places. I did just to double check my numbers, got some of it here in front of me in paper. But if you go and look at the data, pre-1980s, there are insignificant numbers of mass shootings. Now, according to the FBI and the way Mother Jones does it, it's 4 deaths, not counting the perpetrator.
right.
And then and they admit that this is problematic because, and there's another website that I went to, gunviolencearchive.org. It's a good site. It's a lot of crowdsourced stuff. I believe they're the one that I looked at was crowdsourced. And they don't use the FBI's metric, right? Because you can have shootings. We have had shootings this year where nobody died or one person died, but there were like 8 or 9 people wounded. So multiple people were shot. So certainly I would say that's a mass shooting event kind of a thing. But when you look at the data, and we have good data for the 20th century, so nobody's going back to the 19th century. When you go to the 20th century, up until the 1950s and 60s, every decade had 2 or 3. So this is a one source. In the 20s, there were 3, 30s, there were 2, 40s, there were 3, 50s, there was 1, 60s, there were 6, 70s, 15, 80s, 22, 90s, 30. So the data backs up our anecdotal feeling of having lived through it to say, hey, there was something that changed. Now, if we could say that there was no Second Amendment until the 1980s, and then in 1980, gun ownership quadrupled, well, then we could say, there's the problem, or that's the most likely problem.
Right.
But we know that's not the case, and we can talk about the Second Amendment. I'm ready to go down that road, too, if you want to go down that road.
We're definitely.
So you say, well, what changed? And if you lived through it, you know what changed. So, and I don't think it's one single thing. So just so everybody, cards on the table, I'm an avid gamer, right? I've been a gamer for a long time. Board games, war games, people die in war, and you play war games. And so I remember when these things happen, but you start saying, what all went down? So just broadly, this is not one guilty gun kind of thing. CNN, which brought us news constantly, started in 1980. MTV, 1981. HBO started in 72, but it didn't go to nationwide distribution until 78, and it didn't go 24 hours a day until 82. cable TV hit 60%, so we crossed over the midpoint in 92. Gaming consoles began in the early 70s with Pong. You might have had that like I did. But you get the Nintendo NES in 1985. And so in this kind of world of the 80s, where you have a proliferation of various and sundry media things that are coming at the tail end of what had been a spiritual awakening, the quote-unquote the 60s, right? But that's the fourth spiritual awakening. That spiritual awakening was the first of our national story that was not exclusively Christian. There was Christian elements, but it wasn't exclusive. So that's why a lot of Christians don't claim it as the fourth great awakening. They're wrong, but that's the reason why. But in it, you saw a lot of things, some of them moving for positive things. So like civil rights for women, more civil rights for people of color, the battles that began on that road. And so those things are positive. But connected to those things was a consistent challenge against, I guess we could say, the normative rules of our society, right? Now, there's some rules of our society that I think most of your listeners, or I at least, would say, yeah, I'm glad those changed, or I would have opposed those as well. My family did oppose those, kind of a thing. But in general terms, you began to move into, in the late 60s, early 70s, a psychology or a worldview that put I at the center as opposed to we or the other person. And you began to see things like divorce rate exploding in a way that, while we would like to sometimes paint that connected to women's rights, and of course they should have the right to leave, a lot of what began to be expressed was a what I need for me. You began hearing in a lot of the music of the late 60s, early 70s, kind of a mindset of the only thing that matters is your happiness. You should be happy. Find your happiness. The drug culture that began in the late 60s that took the lives of some of our great, wonderful singers of the 60s and then into the 70s began to perpetrate and kind of infiltrate the entertainment industry at large, not just music, not just rock and roll,
right.
Jazz, a lot of other places, began to find its footing, right? To say, hey, this is okay, this is safe, this is fine. So all of that is laying that foundation in the 60s and into the 70s that then explodes in the 80s, where you then begin to pick up this sense of taking the me first attitude. And many people looked at the late 80s and the 90s as the me decade.
Right.
And you begin to have, remember, the yuppies came out as kind of, it was like they were hippies early, now they're yuppies, and that was not a good transitional accurate statement, but the point of being a yuppie was a younger professional, but somebody who's individualized, making as much money as they possibly can.
Right.
So wealth in excess.
I want to say this, and I believe the reason why it transitioned the way that it did is because it was a narcissistic I.
Yes.
It wasn't you need to self-love, like I need to love myself.
It wasn't that.
I'm in love with myself, and I'm the most important thing in this world, and I need to take care of me, and everyone else needs to take care of me, and it's all about me, me, me. And you're right, in the 80s, like when Reagan first came into office, I remember how down Americans were because of the gas prices, because of the gas shortages, because of the whole Iran hostage situation that went on, and the failed attempt to rescue them and all this. And when Reagan came in, things changed. And he said they would change. And I remember people being proud again, like being proud to be Americans. The thing is that it didn't take very long while he was in office that all of a sudden that switched to being proud to be an American to where it did. The entire decade was a me decade.
Sure.
And I remember, like, you could visibly see the way people changed and the way they acted compared to before that. So
now then drop in at that exact same time, the arrival, now it had been happening or started in the 50s, but it's really kind of popularized the idea of postmodernism. And simply put, we've talked about this before. You have, I think it's Jean, but Jean I always get his name right. Baudrillard writing Simulacra and Simulation, right? So it's kind of the seminal text that people talk about postmodernism, and the idea that nothing is real. That's the idea of postmodernism. And you see this in art and writing. It's when you begin having questions of like, is there a meta narrative? Narratives are all lies. There's what words don't mean what they think they mean, and a lot of questioning happening from a literary point of view. The Matrix kind of mines this very well as a movie, the first one, and so in that you begin moving as a society at large this view of, well, if nothing's real, if there's nothing true, if I am all that matters. And then this wasn't initially, but later into the 90s, it began, not only is nothing true, you create your own truth. The only truth is what's true to you.
Right.
Because that sounds so good. It feels so wonderful, right? So then if you march down that road, you now are on the cusp of this horror that we're in now, in which, on the one hand, as a society, we would want to still say, hey, what's true for you is great. Go be yourself. And at the same time say, well, you can't kill somebody.
Right.
Because clearly, if what's true for me is good for me as I feel it, then killing somebody should be none of your business.
Well, I made that argument before.
You have.
I've made it to people who believe that, and I go, so if I believe it's okay to kill you because I don't like your belief, well, it's okay because that's my truth,
Right.
And no. And I go, yeah. That's exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that all that matters is me. All that matters is you. If I smack you right now, you may say, you smacked me. And my truth is, no, your face smacked my hand. It's
That's great. That's great.
That's how ridiculous this whole concept is.
Now, add one last piece in to our puzzle. It's like, what happened, right? Is that, as you know, starting in 2004, well, starting in the late 90s, but you start having I can't say it fast enough, the explosion of news information through the internet. And in 2004, the iPod comes. In 2007, the iPhone comes. Now, phones had come before the iPhone. So you begin in the early 2000s to have a sense of mobile computing, which the iPod and the iPhone in particular brought to life. And even calling them phones is really an insult. It's a mini computer. It's your most mobile computer. And at the same time, once you get to 2008, 2009, 10, you get the explosion of Facebook, the explosion of Twitter, the beginning of what we call social media today, where you are inundated with information that often can be either information that feeds a bad belief that you have, or an information that makes you feel like everybody's out to get you and things to do harm to you. So you, again, back to this idea of a culture of despair, and back up to the late 1890s, right, and bring in Nietzsche. Right, so Nietzsche first, which doesn't take hold until after the horrors of World War I or World War II, Korea, Vietnam. But underneath it all is this kind of flow of like, really, not only is nothing is true, everything is basically death. There's no point. If there's no point, if certainly taking God out of the equation, but just in general, if there's no point to life, why shouldn't I, if I feel like it, go rape somebody, or if need be, kill somebody? Why not kill myself? There's no point to it. So suicide explosion takes off in the same time period on the charts as far as, amongst young people. The current generation, I won't even try to use a generational group, but children who have been born, say, in the last 20 years, are amongst the most depressed ever in the history of us tracking it, and most of us would say that means in all of human history. That may not be fair. There could have been some time in 400 AD that we'd never be able to track. But certainly in trackable history, the most depressed generation. So then why would they not want to go when they consider things to be, back where we started earlier, hopeless? Then why would they not go there? So all those things conspire together, this explosion of news and information that by the 70s, as you noted with music and games, I think GTA came out in the 90s, and it's not the only one. And certainly a lot of games, you kill a monster, or in, the very first-person shooter, Castle Wolfenstein, which was a kill the Nazis kind of thing. You are killing these enemy soldiers, right? But they're Nazis, right? So you kind of give it a pass. But GTA is the one that really took it and brought a visceral touch to it that others have emulated since, right? And so you get this whole world view that's all compressed together, postmodernism, nihilism, an explosion of information that accelerates through my device that's in my face all the time. And so we've crafted this world in which my consideration of the other person is very low. I have very low opinion of the other. I hear from lots of sources that the others are out to get me, particularly if I'm a person of color, or if I'm a white person, the persons of color are out to get me. They're all trying to replace me, like the guy in
Right.
Buffalo. You get this kind of negative messaging, and it's all flowing in this together. All the songs, not all the songs. I mean, there are love songs today. I mean, there were songs. I mean, Highway to Hell was back when you and I were
Right.
young, and there's some death metal that was occurring in the
Right.
late '70s. That was.
But even that nowadays, compared to the
Seems
music,
tame.
it seems so tame.
It does seem tame.
It's like taking, Elvis swiveling his hips to,
Right.
to being practically
I agree
naked.
with you. I
So-
agree with you. But to me, it's very easy to see that we've become excessively sick as a society based on all these factors. To which, in the year 2022, we find ourselves, and there's new factors, obviously, in the past, say, 5 or 6 years, that accelerate. But in general terms, what we're seeing is that we have allowed for a culture that says, hey, there's no truths. Only thing that matters is yourself. There's really no point. It's all nihilistically evil. There's a lot of forces that are out to get you, so you might as well just take matters into your own hand. And even you don't even matter, so go kill some people and kill yourself. I mean, it's a sick, depressed mindset that we can't swing out of easily, but we could, I think, decide to feel differently about it, to make changes. Again, as we were saying earlier, in my own person. And rolling out of that, but we're going to have to be willing to take on some new characteristics to get there.
Well, you're right, and that's a great point. Here's the thing: it's like, how do we do that? Because we've been I don't even know how many decades now. There's this push for people to have fear of everything, including one another. Again, I've talked about this before with Matt Taibbi's book Hate Inc., where the media deliberately pitted us against one another. So now we fear one another. We don't even come together on very little. Do we come together on?
Right.
And and when you have a game like Grand Theft Auto, where before that, and I'm not a big gamer, so I don't know if that was the very first game that came out where there was. The bad guys were whoever you wanted them to be.
Yeah, and ambivalence. Yeah,
right,
moral ambivalence.
Right. Before you were, like you said, you were fighting Nazis or space invaders or whatever.
Yes.
These were the bad guys. Now, you got a game where you could just kill anybody, an innocent bystander. It didn't, a cop or
the
whoever.
The sad thing about GTA was you were rewarded, like a lot of the missions that you go on in the game were to do those things.
Right, exactly, and so to me, it kind of blurs that line, and it's not the same as. I find it funny that they took things like Bugs Bunny off the air because they said Bugs Bunny was too violent.
Yeah,
and yet, the games that they allow their kids to play.
Well, even if so speaking of cartoons, and I had kids, right? So maybe I won't name names, but if you go and examine, say, the children's programming from, say, the 50s and 60s and compare it to 90s and 00s, right? You'll still find some lovely, wonderful, obviously Sesame Street's still around, still believe in that show as a positive, and I don't think you would see necessarily any discernible difference from what it beginning in the 60s to now. But what you will find is an excessively a high growth in what I would say are sarcastic or demeaning children's programming. And they're either sarcastic and demeaning to one another, or they're sarcastic or demeaning to the authority figure in the storyline. Now, again, so to get off games for a second. So games are not the problem. It's all of it is the problem.
Exactly.
Right? I'll get back, and I'm not picking on CNN, but they're really the first one. Well, TNT, Turner was really out there first, but CNN, right off the bat. And the point is, once you went away from the three main networks, who were not saints of paragons of virtue, but they didn't have to necessarily compete with each other for the almighty dollar like you have with multiple peripheral. There it is, that word again. I'm not saying it. My tongue. I got these lips at Walmart, so that's the best I got. They're not able, you now have to compete for eyeballs in a way that the big three did not.
Right.
So then you see them pandering to kind of like what's most sensationalist to get eyeballs, right? So CNN's as guilty as GTA. MTV's as guilty as CNN. The fact that children's programming was aimed at saying you can be as ugly or somewhat ugly and sarcastic. So there were shows we would not let our children watch,
Right.
because we felt like the portrayal of the children was not the kind of modeling that we wanted for our kids to adopt.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll also say the Weather Channel's guilty too. Especially here in Florida.
Here in Florida, yeah, Hurricane Alley.
You can, a hurricane formed off the coast of Africa. We'll make sure you stay safe. We're going to keep track of it until it hits us.
We're going to build your hysteria, right? We're
Exactly.
going to build your hysteria.
It's crazy. And,
Yeah.
And so, everything is about the almighty dollar. It's about sensationalizing everything to get you to watch us instead of the competitor.
So let's just, again, to make sure to drive home a key point. Somebody's sitting there watching this podcast, and they go, okay, what do I do about gun control? Turn off your device. Turn off your device. Turn off what your children watch. Make your child go outside with you and plant a flower. Go sit in a quiet room. Go read a book. Go to the library. Go to a local park. Go for a walk. Build a craft. If you don't have children, build a craft. Go buy Legos for yourself. There's a lot of things that we could do. So again, a lot of times, I want the gun thing solved. It's like, really? Do you really? Are you ready? And the moment you say what they need to do to make the turn, we won't even get into the question of whether or not there's something about postmodernism they should change, like in their mindset. I think there clearly is, but that's a different topic for us. We won't even get into that. The moment we say, here are solutions, then many people are as bad as Biden. Let's stop the lobbies. Okay, we'll stop all lobbies. Oh, I didn't say that.
Right.
It's like, let's fix the gun thing. So go outside and plant a garden. Oh, what? No, I don't want to do that. Go be nice to your neighbor. Oh, no. I want somebody else to fix it for me.
Right.
Which is code, back to where we were talking about some of the things in the previous episode, for I want the almighty government to do stuff. It's like, what? Actually, no, you don't. In fact, the whole reason and fear of the government is why the Second Amendment is such a big deal for people. Not to make you go there now, but just we can fix things. There are things you can do on your individual level, both from a sense of appealing to your local government. And I've got a list of things. I've already written my mayor. I'm about to write the rest of the commission. He's not responded to me. So I'm going to out him in front of the rest of the commissioners and say, all right, you didn't respond. I want everybody else to know that I sent this letter. And I posted this on my Facebook, which is nothing, my little Facebook. But we all can take these kinds of steps relative to actionable items for the larger system. But first, don't look for other people to solve the problem. Take steps that you can take for yourself and begin to do the kinds of things that addressed the systemic or deeper philosophical issue that you and I are laying out.
So for people that were the listeners and the viewers, it's what you're saying, if I'm gathering this correctly, is for us to take responsibility, for us to do something to change instead of depending on the government, because I feel like the majority of people out there today think it is the government's job to take care of us, to do everything for us. And so they expect it, and it's like, no, how about we do something? If my neighbor is and I'm not saying and here it goes, because back in the day when I was a kid, you were a kid, neighbors did take care of one another, but nowadays, ever since it became I and me, we don't think about that. It's like, why would I take care of them? Why would I help them? They're not,
When was the last time you ever heard of anybody going to a neighbor and borrowing a cup of sugar or a cup of milk?
Not since I was a kid.
Exactly. Right? Now, how would that start? The only way that starts is you come out of your door and meet your neighbor. And I know how scary that can be. I know how tricky that can be for some people. But it's nothing more than go do something simple. Go to freaking grocery store, buy a candy bar or a little tiny box of Oreo cookies, something small. If you bake, but in this day post-COVID, don't bake anything.
Right.
Just go get some Oreo cookies, just something simple, and go next door with a bow on it and say, I've never met you. My name's Carl. I'm your neighbor. I live 2 houses down from you. And begin that process. So my wife and I have done this. Now, a lot of this goes back to both our Christian ideas and our view of how we constructed our church. So we've lived in our house since '94, and so we've been involved in kind of a church-focused viewpoint for most of the years in that house. So it was a big deal for us about building community. But I know all my neighbors. I know their names. I know where they are. And if some of them that I've forgotten some names, I still know their face. They know my face. We talk or we'll wave. We'll see each other. That is something that takes effort to build and effort to maintain. But you got to do it.
Right.
And if for no other reason, think, I need to go borrow a cup of sugar.
And that means you have to be selfless and quit being so damn narcissistic. Honestly, I mean,
Yeah.
here's because I want to point this out because I've heard a lot of people say, and of course, the majority I would say, if not all of them, are Christians. They'll say it's because we took God out of the schools, we took prayer out of the schools, we took this, we took that. It's because people don't go to church. And I say, no, that's not it. It has something to do with our spirituality, but it has nothing to do with church. You have countries from Sweden to Finland to Norway to, I mean, Japan, all these atheist countries, and I say atheist, meaning that the overwhelming majority of them are not religious or
Sure.
not Christian. They don't have these issues.
Right, and that, by the way, is a fair point against our hypothesis.
Right, because they don't have prayer in the school, they don't teach
Right.
God, they don't teach religion, they don't do any of that. And yet they're able to get along. And why? Because they're doing exactly what you just said.
Yeah.
I have a friend in Finland. He talks to the old lady downstairs. He helps her out, whenever she needs help about things. He cares about the people in his community. And
I do believe we have that in abundance here. It's just not the dominant. I think that there are, maybe I shouldn't say in abundance.
I wouldn't disagree, but don't you think that the people here think, I just need to give money, that's my way of showing that I care?
Well,
Instead of
back to the
actually-
I, right? I'm
Right.
self-reliant, right? So the I thing we talked about is that in a lot of the countries that you're thinking about in Europe, at least, there's not the big grocery stores we've talked about.
Right. There's
Right?
not.
You go to the market once a week or every day, right? So you're walking to market.
Yep.
And if your neighbor's older, you buy them their bread or you buy them, some of their greens that they're going to have for the next 2 days, kind of a thing. And so because we've constructed a society, and this I think is somewhat unique in the world, we've constructed this society in which it is all highly mobile and, again, highly individualized, right? It separates us by default. So that I don't need you. I don't need to borrow a cup of
Right.
sugar, right? I don't need to borrow a cup of milk. Well, now I'm no longer cooking anyway, so nobody cooks, right? Everything's bought and purchased, so that's a whole different piece of it. But that plays a role, I think, in that. I guess there's a part of me that wants to say I know of people like myself in homes and apartments and places in Orlando, in rural places that I have friends in. And they do also have a known community of friends around them.
Right.
It's probably not in the majority. It's probably smaller than I would wish it to be.
Well,
but it's not impossible to be done.
And that's one of the things I will say about Christian churches, and not all of them, but I think a big part of them, they do have this sense of community, and so they,
try.
at least within their own congregation,
Yeah.
they'll, they may not welcome you with open arms if you're not part of the congregation, but at least in their congregation, they have a sense of community and helping each other out and doing the best that they can for people to help them. And so I like that sense of community. In fact, I know many people, join a church because they like that sense of community, since they're not getting it from their neighborhood. I think that if we followed, how they are in Europe, where they do have a sense of community,
Sure.
that of course helps, because, I don't know anything about this kid who shot up that school, but, it's just like with George Floyd. I go, we can look at George Floyd and say, oh, he was not a good man, okay? But when we look back when he was a kid and his teacher asked him, what do you want to be? And while he didn't know the name of it, what he described was a Supreme Court justice, so he could put bad people away. My question is, what the hell happened to this kid at
Yeah.
this age who wanted to be a Supreme Court justice to where he ended up on drugs and
Yeah.
which I can guarantee you this kid never saw himself ending up like this as an adult.
Sure.
So the system fails us, and when I say the system, I mean society fails us. We fail
Yeah.
each other, and we're all responsible for this. I don't care what anyone says. We're all responsible because of our inaction or because of certain actions that we take that that cause these situations to be able to actually happen.
Well, and it's like we said last time, the empathy that you should have for one another. And if we could all just keep in our mind that you literally do not know what is going on for another person. And they may have cut you off in the road. They may have been bad to you. They may look funny in your school. But if we could find, once again, some shared humanity, a lot of the people who are involved in these mass shootings have been bullied early in their life, have gone through hard experiences that leave them broken and feeling helpless or angry. And no, I'm not saying that just, put a happy face on in all your shopping, and that's going to cause everybody who's unhappy to become happy. But there's a ripple effect of kindness and of generosity of spirit. And I have seen it over and over again in my life, and I believe very strongly in it. And that if we did do this as a people, as a society, in other words, standing up against the darkness, not against any one specific group that just kind of wants to overwhelm us with, like I said, despair or whininess or violence, against the kind of methodology or the cultural viewpoint of all the things, like some of the stuff we see in some video games. If we stand against that and say, no, hang on a second. I'm not going to feed my soul with this sarcasm. I'm not going to feed my soul with this negativity. I'm not going to feed my soul with this view that the human other is only a way to score points for myself, whether in a video game or in my middle school class. I'm not going to do that. And if we make that intentional stand, then I am confident we can make a return to where we were pre this hypothetical time you and I are saying. I believe that very strongly.
Absolutely. Well, and this is a good segue into this. It starts with us. So when we get to the core of it, as you and I have talked about, or I know again it's probably been off air, when it comes to self-love and learning to love yourself, from personal experience, I can tell you this: what happens when you learn to love yourself. You don't get angry at people as much. And I can tell you, up until recently, like in the past few years, I wouldn't say I was angry, an angry person, but it didn't take much for me to ignite. If I felt somebody was threatening me, or not even threatening, just questioning me,
sure,
that sort of thing, I would go off like a child, and that's what it came down to, because I had insecurities of my own that were bothering me, and I would take out on other people. But when you learn to love yourself and accept yourself for who you are, you no longer feel like a victim. You no longer feel disenfranchised. You no longer feel the anger. I'm not going to say you're never angry, because sometimes there's justification in being angry.
Correct.
Your fear level drops dramatically, and you realize that when people, like you said, when people are upset or yelling at you or cut you off, it's not personal. They're going through the same thing that you went through. They're dealing with their own demons, their own insecurities, and they're mad.
Mm-hmm.
They're mad at the world because they're mad at themselves. And I truly believe that we start there, and we surround ourselves with like-minded people who understand the importance of self-love and that they love themselves. And that's how you grow a community of people who start caring about others. Because along with this, fear and anger dissipating, what grows is empathy and compassion and love for other people. And, that's the answer. I mean, truly, that's not the answer people are going to want to hear.
Correct.
But that's the answer, because then when I find people who have, who are victims, instead of going, you're just one of those, you're just another victim, and all you want to do is cry, and talk to them like that, how do I expect them to be receptive to my message?
Right.
But if I can understand where they're coming from and understand why they're doing what they're doing, and it has nothing to do with me, maybe I can say something or do something that can help that person overcome that or come out of that. Because I don't think the majority of us really want to be there. I mean, some do because they like the attention they get. But I think most of us would rather have a nicer and better life for ourselves and be happier.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So, okay. So we solved it. But I know that's not what you want to hear, so we're going to talk some more about this. All right, so let's look at the Second Amendment.
Okay.
And what it exactly says. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Yep.
Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. Of course, as the argument's been made, when this was written, we had muskets. We didn't have, assault rifles, as you will,
or rapid fire handguns.
or rapid fire handguns, or any of that. You're right, and so.
So what's the history of that? That's the first place I think you always have to go. Is like contextually, like what's happening there.
So I think the same concept applied back then applies today. So I think that we were afraid of some country like England coming over here and trying to take over. Well, if you have the people of the U.S. owning guns, people are less likely to come and attack us if they know that, hey, every citizen here has 6 guns.
Okay.
So it's not a smart thing to do. And I think that applies today. Is that I don't think so much the tyrannical government thing that people always throw out there is like, oh, it's to keep the government from doing bad things against us. I'm sorry, but the technology has gotten to the point where all they have to do is fly a little drone over, drop a grenade on you, and you're gone, or whatever they do. You wouldn't even know that it was happening. So this silly idea that your rifle, even if it's an AR-15, is going to stop the government from doing what they want to do. Every time I've ever seen the government step in, where it was the ATF or the FBI or whoever, all these yahoos with their guns and their camos and everything, or just throw their arms up and give up. And I thought you. Or
they lose big.
Right. I thought you were going to fight. What's the sense of doing all this training and everything if all you're going to do is just give in?
Sure. I still think we should back up though and go even before, because what you said is actually the argument most of the founders would say. So if you go to websites that are pro-gun, and so again, cards on the table. I don't own a gun. Don't plan on owning a gun. I'm happy that you may own one. I'm happy for the Second Amendment. There's a lot of civil rights reasons that African Americans in particular are desperately to own a gun, and that's a whole nother conversation. So I'm happy. I don't want to own a gun. Don't plan on owning a gun ever. So I'm not a gun owner, for your listeners' sake, kind of a thing. But when you go to their sites and say, what did the founders say? And you have to dig for it. Almost everything listed by the founders is what you just said. It's the idea of national defense. So then one should say, well, hang on a second. We have the Army. We have the military for that. Like, what's up with that? So then that leads us to not the last point, but the point before the last point, which is they didn't want there to be an army. So then you have to say, well, okay, hang on. Why did they not want there to be an army? Because it's a country. Don't countries have armies? Like that's kind of what we just imagine happens, that there's some sort of a military. They didn't want an army. And that takes us back to the key point, the first point, which is back with the English Bill of Rights is what it's often called. But the Declaration of Rights that came in 1689, not a full year, but a few months or so after the Glorious Revolution, the Bloodless Revolution, overthrew King James II, and instituted William and Mary of Orange as co-regents in England. There's a whole other story, which if you want to ask questions, dive in. But so they do this, right? When they do this, the leaders of Parliament write a declaration of kind of why did we invite this guy to invade our country. And in there, they lay out very clearly that they felt like King James did these two things, and they list them in this order, so this is important. By raising and keeping a standing army within this kingdom in time of peace without consent of Parliament and quartering soldiers contrary to law, second step, by causing several good subjects, being Protestants, to be disarmed at the same time, And so then later, they assert their ancient rights and liberties, declaring, and again, they do them in this order, this way, that the raising or keeping a standing army within the kingdom in time of peace, unless it be with the consent of Parliament, is against the law, that the subjects, which are Protestants, there's a whole conversation about religion there, we'll just skip that, the subjects may have arms for their defense suitable to their conditions and as allowed by law, right? So what they're saying is, we felt like King James II was using a standing army to enforce his rule against our like elected representatives or our idea of a government of the people. Now, they didn't use that phraseology, but that's basically what's happening there. When that gets signed into law, 1689, most of the colonists who are their families in 1776, most of them come post 1660. So they are coming to the New World and or born in the colonies under the auspices of this glorious revolution, this sense of a declared rights that England did not have before this. There was nothing in writing. They had some statements, that some things that Parliament had done through the whole century of the 1600s, but they didn't have this declared sense of rights. And there's a whole list. And if you read that list, you kind of go, oh, wow, because all of a sudden you start seeing our Bill of Rights. It is this sense of rights that 70 years later, various and sundry citizens who happen to live in the New World began to argue their rights were being impinged, restricted, infringed upon by whom? By the government. Whose government? Our own government, because we're British citizens living in New York or Charleston or wherever, and the British government is infringing upon our rights. John Adams makes the argument that the most egregious thing was not anything to do with representation, as we often believe, but was about the idea that we had taken from us the right to jury trial, which is listed in the English Bill of Rights. So there's this long list. There's about 12 or 13, 14 statements that are in the English Bill of Rights. That is the foundation. When they start writing the documents that we look at as the revolutionary documents, where they're really expressing collectively, what is it you're mad about and what are you trying to get to? The Stamp Act Congress in 1765 that has a Declaration of Rights. The First Continental Congress has what's called the Declaration and Resolves. And then, of course, most famously in 76, the Declaration of Independence. And there's others that are not well as known. Some are localized in certain states and some are letters and personal. They almost always stand on, we've got a list of agreed upon rights that have been infringed upon. All right, so they fight the revolution and they win. And keep in mind, part of what kicked off the war was in Boston, the governor, the military governor, was determined to make sure nobody got crazy, don't want to have another Boston massacre. How do I do that? I go to where they have stacked up guns and ammunition, and I collect it. I take it from them. Before Lexington and Concord, he pulled that off because there were several stores of weapons, and he pulled one off. And after that, the Sons of Liberty said, we're not watching close enough. So the whole one if by land, two if by sea, I think it is, Paul Revere and all those guys, right? And so that idea of the Minutemen had already existed. So when Lexington and Concord happened, you end up with the shot heard around the world and that whole disaster from a British point of view, right, which kicked things off. But say if you say, what was Lexington and Concord about? It was about the government trying to take the weapons of the people for their militias, right, not going into their homes, but in a stacked kind of place where it was. And so in their minds, as they're writing these battles, that's what they're thinking about, right? They win. Fast forward 6 years, right? 6 years, yep. And they construct a second government, and they strengthen the government. So if you read the first government, there's no standing army at all, and every state is expected to have a militia. And that's all it stated. And the government had very little power at all. It's a very Lockean document, John Locke, right? They write the second government because some, Hamilton, Madison, John Jay, some other guys, Washington somewhat, thought this first government wasn't strong enough to tie us together as a successful nation. It was more like the EU today with 13 independent nations, right? We need to do better. So they write it and they strengthen it. They move towards Hobbes, a stronger government. Some of the rock stars of the revolution, Patrick Henry, Sam Adams, they cry foul. These guys are committing treason, and they do all they can as the anti-federalists to stop this happening. Their biggest complaint as it looked like momentum was working against them, they all started saying there's no list of guaranteed rights. So Madison, in particular, comes out and says, we'll deal with this. We promise. And so they win a tentative agreement to get the Constitution over the line. And in Madison's very first act of Congress, or one of his very first, was he said, we're going to have an amendment process beginning immediately to construct changes that we think are appropriate. They go through the whole process. There's like 30 different things or 40 different things recommended. They finally come down with 12. They do not pass the first two. So what we call the First Amendment is actually Amendment number 3 on the way Madison had them listed. And in that second place, now fourth and originally, second place was the statement mimicking what they had done here. And the reason why they don't mention both parts is because in the new government, Congress and the president was allowed to have a standing army. And in the minds of the anti-federalists, this is a horrible idea. The Second Amendment is so much more about their fear of a standing army, because how had a standing army to that point in time been used? Exclusively against the people. Now, Madison argued we don't need this because in our Constitution, the army cannot be used domestically. So if you know, our military, we have bases locally, but anytime there's something happening, I think anytime, it's the National Guard, which is our modern equivalent of militia, right? Who come and do things. The military stays on bases and sort of focused outward, kind of a thing. So that's the mindset in the 1780s, that we've now moved the government to be more powerful than we think it should be, according to the Anti-Federalist, and you've actually legally given them a right to create an army, as opposed to that being at the state level. Therefore, we have to have a provision by which each state or each individual can participate in a state militia aimed at whom? At the national government. Again, now remember, when you read the founders who wrote about it, Madison's one of the more prolific. It's all against, like you said, a foreign enemy will be less likely to attack us because we're all armed, kind of a thing.
Right.
But the writing of the Second Amendment is aimed at the idea of a tyrannical government. Now, that said, I think in the year 2022, I know they won't, but I think that reasonable gun owners could recognize that's not our setting today.
Yeah.
We have a vast military. So the idea that there's another nation in the world who fears attacking us because all the nation's citizens are armed is ludicrous.
Well,
and the idea, as you said, that we would be able to apply force and threat to local government because we're all armed. It's not ludicrous, but it's a stretch, is the way I guess I would say it.
So here's the thing, though. Because our military is what it is, which is bigger than the next 10 countries combined.
It's pretty big.
Okay. Who in their right mind thinks that individual citizens, even if you come together, could conquer this military that no other superpower in the world will even consider attacking because,
right.
So
if you hear anybody ever talking about the threat of a civil war, if they are talking about a civil war that involves armies moving, then they are not paying attention to the current scenario. There's literally there can be, I think we may be very close to one, or maybe we're in the throes of one right now, a civil war, a war state that works asymmetrically, where parts of the citizenry are at deep odds with each other to the point of wishing to silence or shut the other side down. But it will never look like marching armies led by Grant and Lee.
Right, exactly.
Because of the reason you said.
Yeah,
At least that's what I believe.
I agree.
Unless a sector of the military led the Civil War. So that part could happen where a general was able to, like you see happening in other states, right? There are other nations around the world where this does happen. And that would be different. So that kind of a civil war could happen. And then you start wondering who's closest to the buttons, right? Who controls all the different pieces and which admiral and which ship and which marine guy with helicopter over here, which side are they going to land on? That could happen, but I really think I feel like that's a far-fetched idea.
I agree, because the military is, the soldiers who are part of the military have sworn, an agreement to
Their
protect
oath.
this
Mhm.
country,
Yeah.
not a general.
And I think January 6th was a great moment to put that to the test. It's not
Right.
the only one we'll probably ever have, but certainly was one. I saw no military leaders participate, step up,
Right.
renounce their oath, take up arms. There weren't tanks driving down, in D.C. to help out.
Because I think they realized that there would be no support, or very little support, from anybody in the military, and I don't think you'd get any support from the people of this country.
So fortunately, we didn't have to see that, which takes us to then the questions like, well, then I would not. Well, I don't know what I would do. I was going to say I'm not a supporter of eliminating or amending the Second Amendment. Now that I say that, I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to get in real trouble with a lot of my friends, very conservative friends who happen to hear this, but I don't know how I would handle that. If there was an actual amendment being proposed, I might actually support it.
Why wouldn't you? Because here's the thing. All right, so
I probably haven't. My quick answer is I haven't thought about it
Okay.
before, that it would actually happen.
only because I think that, the Second Amendment is there so that we can all bear arms. That's our right as American citizens, that we can bear
Right.
arms.
The individual
Right.
citizen should not be constrained.
And look, if we're being honest, there's going to be people out there, especially on the conservative side, that say, look, I don't own weapons or own guns because I think that I can protect myself from a tyrannical government, or a foreign government for that matter, a foreign military. I'm doing it to protect my family from people who want to cause us harm, from
Sure.
people who are willing to break into my house, or whoever it might be. And they have a legitimate,
Yes.
argument there. So my question would be, does it take an AR-15 with, however many rounds that you can get into your extra clip there? And I forget how many rounds it is. I want to say 47, and it's probably not right, but it's going to be around that.
Well, it's a very moddable weapon, which is one reason why it's so popular.
Right.
And I'm sure that there are some mods to it, equipment that you can get to it that really extend the actual supply of bullets.
Right. And I've heard people use smart ass answers, and I go, look, this isn't how we're going to solve the problem. You can say, well, maybe I don't like reloading my clips that much. And
Yeah.
I'd say, would you say that if it was your kid who was shot and killed at the school?
I guess the only challenge I would have back to you, and this is more of a posing a question, feel free to elaborate, is upon what metrics would you draw the line that you're going to draw? Because you're saying, I'm going to let people have weapons to defend themselves, and I assume you would let them have weapons for hunting if they wanted to sport shooting or something. Okay, so then on what metric do you draw the line? Because I feel like some really creative gun manufacturer could come up with a smaller something that's not an AR-15 that could still basically do everything an AR-15 does.
Sure. So here's the solution. Chris Rock came up with it years ago.
Yeah, what do you say?
He said, everybody should be able to have as many guns as you want. Just make bullets $5,000 a piece. And he's right, because you're going to go, I really hate you, but 5,000. I don't know if I hate you that much.
No, that's good. Yeah, that's good. That's
and
good.
I think
That's creative.
I think that is the perfect solution, honestly. But of course, there are people out there who can make their own bullets, their own ammo. So that's not so. But those people are very far and few in between. I don't think that there's a big majority of people who can make their own ammo.
Yeah.
And so make it more expensive. The Second Amendment says you're allowed to own
no
guns.
doubt. That's a way to go down the road, is to turn it so that you deal with the equipment that makes it a deadly weapon, which is bullets.
Or what if we, and again, I know this is kind of way out there. This is me just talking out my butt, right? But what if we got to the point of technology where we were able to have weapons that shot lasers, but it only stunned people?
Yeah.
I mean, would we be able to replace guns that have ammo with guns?
So this to me taps into one reason why I definitely do not have a gun, and why I think that there'll always be an issue. In that I think deep inside most people there is a Cain-like figure, so from the Bible,
Right.
who, if they can get away with it, would inflict harm. Right? Back to Hobbes.
Right.
Our natural bent, right, is to. So you see children who they're not from families with guns, and they play. I don't know if they do this anymore, but when we were a kid, at least, cowboys and Indians and gun, cops and robbers, and you're shooting each other with your fingers.
Right.
And so I got into a lot of trouble, not a lot of trouble, but I was disliked as the youth pastor because I refused to ever support a youth activity in which they went and played laser tag or paintball. Because that's to me, this is a great illustration of the gross worldview that we have adopted. Because what is happening in both of those events? I am killing you. And we can say it's for fun. We can say it's for frivolity. We can say it for team building, as I've seen it done.
Right.
But what is happening in the event itself? Take all the I like it out of the equation. What is happening? We're running around shooting one another. What is that? And I think that's an example to me of feeding into the point of, would they be happy with the laser that stunned somebody? Like, no. There's a part of the person who enjoys even sports shooting. I understand it's like, no, it's my ability to hit the bullseye and this kind of stuff.
Right.
But I think that there is something deeper happening that is getting into the nature of the human, that there's a sense in which some people, I think it's why do people like watching some of the movies where the good guy goes and kills all the bad guys? There's something visceral about that kind of attracts us at some deep psychological, maybe subconscious way.
I think those might be two different things. I'll have to
Maybe.
think, I'll
Maybe.
have to think about on this one because I don't want to just simply dismiss, because I obviously appreciate your viewpoint greatly. So I don't want to just simply dismiss it. But I would say if I were playing laser tag or paintball, or whatever, I don't look at it as, oh, I killed you. I look at it as I beat you. Like it's competition to me. And
do you think people who go and play those games, would they do it if it was only targets that you shot at?
Sure. Like, I mean,
okay.
Because
I don't think they would.
Because again, for me, it's about competition.
Yeah, I don't think they would.
It's about beating your score, whatever,
Okay, that's fair.
Maybe
maybe your listeners can chime in.
Maybe
I don't think that. I think most people who play paintball in particular, I think if it was merely in this course, blue team's over here, red team's over here, and you're running through, and you're going to end up a mile down there, and along the way there are X number of targets, and the team that gets to the end in the quickest time with the most points wins. I don't think you'd see nearly the amount of people playing as they do because they're shooting each other.
I don't know. I kind of relate it to when I train women. I've trained women with boxing gloves and hitting the heavy bag.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'd be surprised because women always have all this pent up anger that they're not, because society says you have to be a lady and I can't,
Sure.
I can't show this. So when they put those gloves on and they hit that bag, you would be shocked. They're just going to town. But I don't think when they're hitting that, they think, oh, I'm not saying that they don't have someone in mind. I'm saying that they would never do that in real life. They're just acting out.
And just like we would say, I don't think 99.9% of the gamers who play GTA are not going, maybe 99.9999%.
Right.
They're not going out shooting people any more than the people, same percentage, who play paintball are shooting people.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that is a piece of, I think a very damning piece of the larger point that we're making,
right?
That there is a devaluing of the human in this kind of modern culture post-1980s that then does afford support to the people who do create those kinds of things.
Okay, so because of time constraints, let's move on to this. So we know that there's a lot of mental disorder in this country, and it's getting worse. And so the Republicans don't want to do anything about financing help, for these people to get therapy. They don't want to, that's one of the things I haven't heard a Republican yet. And I'm sorry if you're a listener or viewer, if you're a Republican, please let me know what you've done. Let me know what has been presented as a solution other than prayers.
Yep.
and thoughts.
So that was first on my list. So this is what I sent the mayor of my city, that we demand funding for mental health counseling through the city. So again, people say, well, I can't fix it. It's the national. Screw the national.
Right.
What were we founded on? We were founded on the idea that activity happens locally. Go to your local government. And yes, if you're in a city like Orlando or Miami or Tampa, you can say, well, it's too big. Maybe it is. Maybe you got to then go even smaller to some kind of
neighborhood
or something, right? But you can go in most of our communities around here, Castleberry, Winter Park, Winter Garden, Maitland. These are all small enough. And go to them and demand that they take a step towards healing in things that we know are useful. Because if you say, if I were to say, I want them to ban AR-15s in Winter Park, that they could then say, legally we're going to be challenged at the Second Amendment level, kind of a thing, and they still should do it, right? And don't be afraid to ask your local government, right where you live, to deal with it. And know that doesn't help the people in that other city where this new thing happens next week, right? But again, blooming and glowing with love and hope where you live, right? But we know that mental health is one of the most critical issues, largely because of what we described. One way that we're talking about everything we've said from the 80s to now is a mental health issue, right? And yes, I would love to do a whole variety of things if I could be ruler for the day kind of thing. But these are really they're not likely. We're not going to turn the internet off, right? We're not going to have companies like CNN decide, oh, we're going to show less bad things.
Right.
They're not going to do that, right? So what can we do? We can do, and this is where, again, the rubber meets the road. I can't say, I want those guns handled, and then demand help like from my local government without accepting the fact that, okay, they're going to have to re-divert money or I'm going to have to pay more taxes. One of those two things. I can't go, well, somebody else should handle that, which is why, unfortunately, I think a lot of people appeal to the federal government so that they'll never feel it. No, I need to feel it. If I want something done for this gun crisis that we're in, and I wrote back in 2018, 2017, I wrote my mayor then, and he didn't do anything, and I made a loud noise, and it didn't accomplish anything, but I'm going to keep making a loud noise where I can in my little city, right?
Well, get supporters who in your community who support your viewpoint and bring
exactly.
them with you.
Tell your friends on social media. Tell your neighbors. So what I wrote was that you work with the city, that they should work with the city in partnership with local coalition of mental health experts. Every city's got mental health experts. You ask them, and I think all of them would say, oh my gosh, yes. When I was doing the campaign, I was talking with some mental health experts who work at Winter Park High School. And they were talking about how low their funding was and how many issues they were having that they were seeing with students in Winter Park High School. So we need funding there, right? You need funding for the local police. One of the things the American Psychological Association is harping on is trying to convince local municipalities to put funding for their police to have partnered counselors. Now, some are doing it, so it's starting to happen, but it's sporadic. And again, will this solve all the problems? No. Are there other things we could do? Yes. But these are things that you and I can ask for. We can reach out to. I do think that you should ask, and this was the third thing, that you basically demand your city embrace a buyback program for particularly the semi-automatic weapons, but for any weapons. Will it get all the weapons off? And trust me, for your listeners who are going, but the evil criminals or the mentally insane person, they're going to do it anyway. I understand that and actually don't disagree. But if my complaint is that there are guns off, too many guns, particularly the semi-automatic or the high-velocity guns that we're talking about, and there's a way to get some of them off the street, why would we not want to do that? There's no magic bullet that's going to solve everything in one fell swoop. If we shut down the lobby, even just the gun lobby, right? That's not going to magically fix it. They have so much money, they'll find other ways to control politicians. It's not going to end it. So let's not think in those terms. Let's think of the little incremental things that we all can participate in doing. One of the things that I think we should be doing is we should be looking for ways to support volunteer programs or low-cost programs involving volunteers, but you might focus on people who are retired police officers or military veterans who are willing to volunteer to help guard their schools. Is that a perfect panacea? No. Do we want to make them, bunkers? That's kind of a different conversation piece for me. I understand some of that, but at the very least, there are people who have skill and talent with these things, who have been in situations like veterans. Why not invite them into the solution-making process, particularly if the town goes, we don't have the money to hire 4 new police officers, particularly if you're going to do the health counseling thing you suggest. Okay, fine. Let's get a volunteer program. They've got to go through training.
Right.
They got to go through work. But it's like, if that young man had rolled up to that school, and again, maybe he still would have gotten in. I accept that. But if he'd rolled up to that school and on his way in, he knew there were 4 former veterans or 3 veterans and a retired police officer, not the official person that I think every school has one of these people, but 4 or 5 grandparents and uncles. I don't say they have nothing to do, but they're retirees, right? I feel like there are several people who would love to invest some time in the school day where their grandkid or child goes to school and would help out. But when I asked about this previously, I was told, oh, no, we can't do that for Orange County. And I'm like, why not? And there wasn't a good answer. It was just, we don't want to, or liability issues. And to me, I'm kind of past those as good enough answers.
Right. Well, you made a couple more great points. Look, if we had retirees who did participate in a volunteer program to help protect the schools or whatever, one of the things I've always said is that when you have Florida's the place to start this, because you have a population of a bunch of retirees and you have young people. And what do the retirees do? They go to communities that are walled up and shut the young people out. Instead of going, you know what, I could help these people. Look, I've lived a full life. I have some wisdom that I could, give these kids. Yep. And the kids could show them things that they never knew. And there could be this synergy between them.
Absolutely.
To where they actually love to be around one another, enjoy one another, but instead we're taught to hate one another. It's like,
or we're taught it's my personal life, it's my retirement, me.
Exactly. And so, again, great point. Just it goes back to we've got to stop being a narcissistic country, and that's what we are. I mean, as a whole. Again, not everybody is.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if it's the majority, but I know it's enough that these are the people that we see on the news. These are the people who are getting promoted. These are the people. These are our politicians.
Yeah.
There are examples. These are the people who are part of the mainstream media.
Yeah.
It's all about them lining their own pockets and telling whatever story they need to tell in order to be able to make a fortune for themselves or a name for themselves.
I just feel like we can, again, hope, Civil War. If you, in the city that you live in, can contribute to making it a safer, better place, that might even be with your community standing up and saying, we'll take the legal challenge if it needs to be. And I personally don't think it'll be helpful. We're so fractured right now. The things that will come across as what's a good word? Invasive will only get an explosive response. So we're so fractured right now that people don't want to listen and have a conversation, really, about anything. And we'll see that in our next conversation that you're going to have, and we're going to have together. We're so fractured. Again, thinking in terms of a solution that would involve, say, taking people's guns. That you're not thinking of a good solution, because it's not going to happen, and B, it would be explosive in a way that'd be harmful, right? But we can think of things that we can do on the level where I live. In my little community, in my little town, there's ways that I believe you can step into things that would be helpful, that move us forward, at least in your town, into a healing process by which the person who happens to have guns will not think of the use of guns as something to affect on another human.
Right.
Right?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think the way we do this, I was just thinking, for instance, when we were talking about our neighbors, What if I went around this neighborhood and I knocked on everyone's door and I said, "Listen, are you aware of what happened over in Texas? Are you aware of what happened in Buffalo just recently? Are you aware of those things? Yes. How do you feel about that? I feel they were horrendous. Are you a gun owner? Yes or no, whatever." Instead of attacking or instead of saying, hear them out and say, "What do you think we need to do?" Because people want to be heard. They don't want to be shut down and go, "You're a gun owner? Pfft, no, I don't want to hear what you got to say."
Right.
Because whatever you say is going to be stupid. No, like you said, every little thing that we do, it's not going to solve the whole problem. But if we do a little bit here, a little bit there, if we start funding, you know, therapy for mental health disorders and start getting people through that, that's great. If we can, limit the AR-15 to 10 rounds a clip or something, that's a little bit. Is it the end all be all? Of course not.
Right.
But it's something, and we can do this in several different pockets to where
Right.
it makes it less and less. Because the thing is we're never going to get rid of the guns. So why don't we just face that fact? We're not going to get rid of it, because I know there are people out there, and the right says, "Look, the reason we're not giving in is because there are people on the left who don't want us to have guns." And they're right. There are people on the left who would want to make, if they could, they would get rid of all guns. And I don't agree with that. So I understand their hesitancy to want to give in
Sure.
at all. But we've got to do something, and every little bit helps. And part of that is, like you said, doing these little things that will add up, and they will. And talking to locally to our government, to our neighbors, get a movement going to where,
Right.
but bring everybody on board. Don't just bring people who don't own guns or don't want guns or don't believe in guns. Bring the people who have guns, who understand why they have guns, and bring them into this fold and talk civilly
Yeah.
about solutions that everybody can participate and give their point of view. And I think you're absolutely right. That's the way to go. It's not going to be the federal government. The federal government, as you said, their pockets are being lined. They don't have any desire whatsoever. Even the Democrats, all they do is talk out their ass, and that's from being a Democrat. I'm telling you, I lean left, and I get so frustrated with the nonsense that they talk, and that's all it is. And I get even more upset with people who buy into it. I go, how many times do you have to be smacked in the face
Yeah.
to realize they're going to keep hitting you as long as you let them?
Yeah. It's the system's fractured, and unfortunately,
We're the
entrenched.
only ones. We're the only ones who can fix it, though. Us, the people, the
Exactly.
government. The government has no desire to fix themselves. They like the way it's going on. They like the two-party system. The Democrats like the power and money they get. The Republicans like the power and money they get, and they don't want to share with any other parties. They don't want this.
Correct.
So we're never going to have a third party until we decide there's going to be a third party.
That is correct.
And that's the only way we're going to fix this gun issue as well. And there are so many good arguments. Like, they say, for instance, people in Australia and England and blah, 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 and all these other countries, they have mental health issues, and those people don't shoot up their people. And it's because most of them don't own guns and can't.
Yeah. Unfortunately, no other country has our history
Right.
of weapons. Canada's maybe a close second. Canada, maybe Mexico, but it's in the old world that doesn't exist. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I mean, obviously, a government as powerful as ours could obviously decide it's coming for everybody's guns, or it's coming for everybody's gas owning cars. We're all going to we're going to come take your car. I mean, so the government is powerful enough to do it. So I don't want to. I mean, I'm not trying to just throw my hands up for somebody who really wants all the guns taken away, and they could do it. It just would be very, very explosive, and I think ultimately harmful. Whereas in a lot of other countries where they've done this, the numbers were smaller, the numbers of guns were smaller, and the history was not there of some sort of an amendment that was baked into the history of the people.
Right.
That we are, I think only we're one of the few countries that exist. We're not the only. We're one of the few countries that exist in rebellion. I mean, exist because of rebellion against our own government, and we successfully wrested ourselves out of it. And yes, that's 245 years ago, right? But that's still kind of the ethos of who we are as a people. Ergo, from the start, everybody was on board with everybody having a weapon. And so the numbers are just far more vast. And this is, again, all these layers, right? This is why this time is so complex. You've got an economic system for a segment of industry that we can just call guns that doesn't want to end,
right?
Any more than the coal industry wants to end, any more than the cable news industry. There's thousands, maybe millions of people with jobs. And as a non-gun owner, I can say, I don't really care about those people. But that's an infantile way to respond on my part. And to not acknowledge that these are people who have livelihoods connected. And that trap that we're in this consumer system is, again, part of the product of why it's so messed up right now. From which you think, is that doom and gloom stuff that we're going to come out of. But you know what? Imagine you really thought that there should be no guns, right? Well, if we get past the United States and whatever is going to come next, that's another reason, by the way, to be hopeful. In my opinion, when you look at the history of the world and all the major crisis points that you can find, most of us lived through it. Mm-hmm. And we'll be on the other side. And then you'll be in whatever the new thing is you live in, the new civic entity, and you can start from day one saying, we're not going to have guns here. And ta-da, you don't have guns. So if you were somebody who really wanted there to be no guns, then a collapse of the current system to when new growth could come into a new system, which would not be without being fraught with peril, it would be challenging. And I don't know how long it would be before the forest fire actually bloomed new growth. I don't know how long that would be. But when you're alive on the other side of it, you may be part of the constructive group that says, okay, where we live, this is what the rules will be. And we want it to be this way.
Well,
okay, there you go. That's a good thing. That's a thing to be hopeful for.
Right. So here's the thing, and I agree. If our politicians actually listen to the people, it's overwhelming that people want more regulations.
Yeah.
You have the state of Missouri who went into licensing, like you had to have a license to have a gun. Their gun deaths dropped dramatically. As soon as they got rid of the licenses, they increased dramatically. So that may be a solution.
Sure.
Okay. Regardless, we know that the overwhelming majority of people, including Republicans, want some sort of gun laws to make it more difficult so that people who shouldn't have them don't get them.
Yeah.
Also, the overwhelming majority of Americans don't want to get rid of guns. So I say this. When people are in bad neighborhoods or poor economic neighborhoods and they feel like there's no way out, they can't see a way out because they're too close to the problem.
Sure.
Those of us who live in nice neighborhoods or something, the answer is simple to us. I go, pack your car up and move out. That's what you do. If you don't like your neighborhood, move out. And I would say the same thing about this country. And I know it's a little bit more challenging because it costs a bit more money and where you're going to go and things of that nature. But if you really don't want guns, instead of making a country that says we want guns and trying to make it so that there aren't any, go somewhere you're going to be happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you want to be forced to stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance, go to Russia. That's how I feel about it. Or forced to believe in a certain religion or made to go to church or any of those things. Or, go to the countries that require you to say prayer, 10 times a day.
Yep.
And you'll be happy. The fact is that guns aren't going to go anywhere. I
Correct.
think we need to stop with that argument because they're not going to go anywhere. I think we need to start with that understanding.
Yep.
And then work from there and go,
Agreed.
Let's do what the majority of Americans want to do. Let's find a way to make it more challenging for those who shouldn't have guns like felons and other people, and let's just do the best that we can, and let's but we got to implement the other things that you and I talked about.
Yeah, all the while working on the privately changing of the mentality.
Right, exactly. We need to get away from what we're inundated with today. And you said, oh well, we're not going to change CNN. If you stop watching CNN, we will change it.
Maybe,
but we won't. But we know how human beings are. We're always glued to the major traffic accident. We got to see what happened, and any tragedy, and our eyes go directly to it. So it's unlikely to happen because it's just part of being a human being. So that's why we like the sensationalism.
We do.
So,
but we keep fighting the good fight of saying
right.
the things that we're saying, and calling ourselves to our best selves, calling our friends to our best selves, and going from there to suggesting the positive things that we can bring in the atmosphere of the world around me. And it may seem small, but I'm a big believer in the butterfly effect.
Absolutely.
So that's where you start, and you begin saying, this is the world I want to live in. It's the world I want to see around me. It's the way I'm going to act. Call myself to account, call my friends to account, just in our general sense of how we live. And, maybe the kid who's about to have a bad day, and if I understand the story right, and I think it's may alleged at this point still, but he killed his grandmother before he killed up the kids. Or maybe the guy in Buffalo who's got this twisted view of immigration, maybe he runs across somebody who's got that positive spirit, and he's brought in, and his anger, his frustration is mediated just enough that he doesn't take that step.
Right.
And we'll never know.
Right.
But that's still, I believe that. I believe that can happen.
I not only do I believe it, I know it happens. I know that I can almost assure you that you have been responsible for people taking a different path because you were a positive effect in their life. I know I have been, so I know you have been.
Yeah.
So, because you're a much better person than I am.
No, I don't know
but
about that.
but that's the thing. It's like, look, as the saying goes, united we stand, divided we fall. Come together, as you so brilliantly put, come together as a community, as a neighborhood, as a city, whatever, and start there. Start with your neighbors. See if you have to, if you guys can agree on, look, something needs to be done. That's the first thing. Do you agree that something needs to be done? I think everybody goes, yeah, something needs to be done. Now let's start working on it. Let's really work on it. Let's not point fingers.
Right.
Let's not call names. Let's not do all this, stuff that's going to be, that's going to derail everything.
Yep.
Let's be adults. Quit being children. Let's be adults, and let's act like it, because this is an adult situation. This is an adult conversation that needs to be had, and it doesn't need to be had by children or people with the emotional maturity of a child.
Yep.
So one last question I want to ask you.
Shoot.
What do you think this country would look like if we didn't have guns? Better, worse, same?
Gosh, that's a tough question, because, what do you mean look like? Would we be as angry as a group of people? I think yes, unless we get rid of a lot of other things. Divided, yes. I don't think that changes. I don't think the kinds of things you can do with that. Clearly, there'd be a lot less gun deaths because there are no guns. And the question would be, as we do see in some other countries, would somebody take the more visceral act of like a knife killing, which according to military veterans that I've talked to is a far more challenging thing to do as far as death. It's you're so there touching the person,
right,
kind of a thing. You get their humanity. I think that clearly that'd be a lot lower, but I don't think that would end the challenge that we're having, like emotionally. But if we can snap our fingers, of course, I guess the argument made is like, when is this happening? So if it's like we don't have guns in 1789, then you might say, well, we don't have a country. We may have some other country, right? So I mean, it's a difficult one to go back and say, are there no guns at all in the world? Are they just not in the hands of individuals? will military will there still be an army with guns? And so and then they leave their guns in the base. I mean, those, you have to really kind of start playing down those questions.
Right. No, I just meant amongst the citizens as a whole, but I mean, yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer to that question.
Yeah, because you couldn't. I guess you could, but in a society that lives on a frontier. So Australia was this way, New Zealand was this way. You have to have a way that you could hunt. So you're not hunting with bow and arrow. I mean, I guess you could have, but I think
Joe Rogan does.
Yeah, I don't think that. I don't. Well, again, so the question is, in our hypothesis, are there no guns at all? So then then they don't probably take over the New World, because then their weapons are not stronger than the Native American weapons. But if it's no, they have them, they just can't ever own one. I don't think that would have. I don't see that working out, because even in England and France and other places, the average person had a rifle with which they hunted. And that was true up into, through the 1800s. It's only in the 20th century that some people still hunt to feed themselves, but that's just by their choice. They don't actually have to. Maybe in Alaska, they may still hunt for food that will sustain them with some of the native peoples that are still up there. But yeah, it's a tough one to kind of think your way through, because it's the quick answer is not actually going to really deal with the realities of what would be life on the ground, of like how you will sustain your life and feed your family. So then you have to have a kind of hypothetical date at some point. Then we just okay, we're not going to have guns anymore. We're giving them away. And when is that date? And then how do you make that happen? It's not going to be any easier in 1908 than in 2022, as far as a mentality goes. There was no battles there's no Supreme Court cases until I think the Heller case in 2008. There's no legacy cases like there are in other parts of the Bill of Rights, because nobody ever asked the question, because nobody ever cared, because it was never an issue. I mean, certainly there were deaths by murder by guns, but those were just it's the one person. It's the one-off situation. It wasn't anything. Even in the days of the gangster culture of the 1920s, there still was never some sense in which we need to get rid of all these guns.
Well, wasn't the assault rifle ban back in the 90s?
I think it was, but there still wasn't a Supreme Court case about it.
Oh, really?
The Heller case, I think, is the first case that the Supreme Court ever stepped into, because no politicians or cities or communities ever thought it was an issue that I'm aware of. And maybe what happened is there were some cities that were doing various and sundry bans, and the NRA became much more politicized in the early 2000s. The NRA started as a sport hunting thing. I mean, that's all it was. It wasn't a political action group.
But even the people of the NRA are like, from my understanding, they want more gun laws. But you have this LaPierre guy who seems like a lunatic.
Well, we say fix things. The NRA and people who are in there only for sports shooting, they need to step up and take control of their own agency then.
Right, exactly.
We say that probably about a lot of agencies.
They need to oust that guy, because, again, he was even reasonable up until recently.
Because clearly that would magically fix a whole bunch of stuff. If the NRA came out and said, hey, we want biometrics because they've got this now where you can, or they're not all the way there, but you could, have a trigger connected to DNA, which would not have stopped the Uvalde thing. The guy legally bought a gun.
Right.
I mean, he didn't steal it from somebody. Those were his guns.
Right.
Right. And we can argue about the age of registration and stuff, but that wouldn't have fixed, that.
And again,
crisis.
You're not going to fix everything.
You're not,
but
because of the human. But think about how much better it would be if the NRA, if the majority of their members do believe in some restrictions, much like we have with cars. This is not that hard, people. If you're a gun owner, this is not like some extreme. The people who want to take your guns, that's extreme. What Kurt and I are talking about is not extreme. We're talking about simple kind of regulations that could be applied. And if you're correct, the NRA majority would prefer to do that. They need to take over their own company, their own agency, and then make it happen. Imagine how beautiful it'd be if the NRA came out and said, here are 5 things we want to see applied to the gun industry right now.
And they used to do that. And LaPierre even used to do that. So somebody paid him off. The gun companies said,
somebody.
Yeah. I guarantee it, because he did a 180 on his positions.
But see, a lot of that fits into the story I've told you before, and I've got my book right over there. I see that we're in this,
Yes, I do.
we're in the crisis cycle, and once you get to the deep philosophical divide, and you have the two camps, the other camp is evil, and the only thing you do with evil is eliminate them. And so you get that sense of existential fear on both sides. Both sides
Right.
are afraid that their lives are going to come to an end. They're going to be ruined. They're going to be killed. They're going to be eliminated. So then you become defensive. You become aggressive on both cases. And so then you go down this
But
dumb road that we go down as a species.
it's a narrative that's not true. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It's a false narrative that's been perpetrated to the American people who bought into it, and you see it constantly. Libtards or repugnants or whatever, and they're calling each other names and going, if the Republicans get their way, we're all going to be shot to death. If the liberals get their way, we're all going to be taken
We've
over.
spent the last 30 years
right.
shouting past each other.
Exactly. And so here's the thing. In order for us to, and I'm going to say this, and I want to give you the last word. In order to make this work, stop with your disingenuous, stupid-ass arguments. When you say something like, well, most of the deaths are done by suicide, does that make... These are deaths that are being committed by guns, okay? What if I was someone who lost someone to... In fact, I did. A dear friend of mine. It wasn't to a gun. But what if I had? Does that matter less because someone else didn't shoot him or her? Does that matter? It's a life that's been taken. And so, so stop acting as though if someone else didn't shoot him, that doesn't matter. The other thing is like, I just hear these arguments all the time from both the left and the right that they know they're being disingenuous. They know that the things they're saying are nonsense. And I have another one. I can't think of it right off the top of my head, so I may get the last word if I remember it. But we, just come to the table and be honest, and it's okay to say what you feel, but don't put up arguments that are BS just because you want to win the argument, because that's not going to solve the issue.
Yeah.
So with that,
well, going back to where we started, and I've not attempted to try to study the hundreds of people who have perpetrated, but in my anecdotal, casual memory, and certainly these last two, but everybody or nearly everybody who participates in these was a disaffected, aggrieved in their mind person who was lashing out. And so if we say there is this problem that you and I have argued has born and bubbled up from the mid-70s to now, and it has led to this moment where we have an increasingly mentally unhealthy, nihilistic, devaluing the other human mentality, and we want to stop the gun violence, and the perpetrators are all or almost all in that category. The solution lies in addressing that category. And I don't know any other way to say it other than be a part of the solution of valuing the other. I know you said earlier about the question of whether, taking out prayer or God or the Ten Commandments out of the school, but we have made a choice since the mid-70s to devalue authority, to devalue the sense of truth, of that there is an agreement we should have with one another, that you are a human of value. And because of all these other pressures we've already discussed, we think, many of us think, very selfish or very self-focused, as Hobbes would say, in a way that I'm the only thing that matters. And yet, when I look in the mirror, and when you look in the mirror, you should say, there is somebody with a spark of life for whom I am amazingly patient with their failures and shortcomings. The person you're looking at in the mirror. Mm-hmm. That's one member of the species who I know better than everybody else. And I am amazingly patient because I know deep inside that there's some good, there's a reason to hope, that there's a spark, that there's value in those two eyes I'm looking at. How much more then can I be equally patient with the person who I know less about, the baggage they're carrying, the pain that they're enduring, the situation that they're confronted with, and be a generous spirit to them, either at least in the sense of passing with a smile, a hand wave, just a politeness, or if given the opportunity, a deeper engagement that is at least not curt. Like I'm not talking at the cash register while I'm tapping on my phone because you are insignificant. I'm not flipping you off when I drive past you in the car. I mean, there's these moments that we all have that we should be able to step into of care and grace and recognizing that humanity in those two eyes looking at you, because you know there's already somebody that you are doing that with all the time with deep patience and deep empathy, and it's the person you look at in the mirror.
Right.
Do it with that other person. If we all will do that, I know we can begin to turn this around from a sense of the majority of these people who do this, these disaffected, harmed, wounded people, they won't be there.
Right.
They won't be there to do that act. I believe that with my deep conviction in my soul.
I believe that as well. And again, and I have to say this, I'm sorry. I have to say this. It comes back down to loving yourself. When you can love yourself, you can have compassion for that person. You can think of that person. And I'm going to, and again, as we talked about early on in this conversation, even self-talk affects you, okay? So how many times have you heard someone say, I hate people? I've heard that. I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that. I've said that. And you say it enough, you start believing. Mm-hmm. Because why do you say it? Because somebody did something stupid. So we take the act of that one person and what they did, and we say, I hate people. They're so stupid. Because now we're lumping all people together because of the act of one person. And we don't realize that that's just one person who did something stupid. Everybody else is doing the right thing. But we focus on this one person who we feel has, done us wrong or did something dumb, and we focus on that. Road rage is a great one, because that's one I used to have issue with, because I go, people can't drive. But the fact of the matter is, I have thousands of cars around me where everyone's doing what they're supposed to. There's just one person who's acting like a jackass, And so but my attention is like, oh, everyone's a jackass. Everyone doesn't know how to drive because of this one person. And so we need to remember that it's one person. The majority of us are doing the things that we're supposed to. The majority of us are good people. The majority of us need to look inside ourselves, to be self-aware, to love ourselves, so that we can do exactly what you just said. Yeah. Have compassion for these people and go, why is he acting like a jackass? Okay, he's a jackass, but why is he acting that way? Maybe he needs to go to the bathroom really fast or something. Who knows? But just put yourself in other people's shoes, and I think, again, bringing this back to the argument about whether or not we should have more stringent gun laws. And this was the other thing I was going to say. When you say, oh well, the states that have the strictest gun laws are the ones with the biggest gun problems, you cannot solve this if you don't do it on a scale, a national scale. Because as long as people can bring in guns from across the state lines and stuff, and there's no repercussions for that, it's not like the borders are gated up or anything, or you have to, sure. So it doesn't matter. And so while I do believe we have to start locally, we need to branch that out to other people and to other communities, to where it's now a state. Now it's it's a region. Then next thing you know, it could be the country that could abide by these laws. So.
Yeah.
I could go on and on, seriously, but I know I don't want you to miss dinner. Well, Carl, thank you. A great, and again, another great conversation. I love talking to you, and I love your thoughts and your solutions, and I hope people, again, I hope they take heed to the things that you say,
Thank
because
you.
you again dropped a lot of great wisdom there. So
All right. Till next time.
till next time. All right, folks. Hope you had fun with that. If you didn't, let me know. Until next time, take care, be safe, and love yourself so you can love others. Peace.